Welcome to my very first time-lapse color pencil portrait tutorial. For this piece, I'm using Prismacolor Premier pencils, Strathmore Bristol 100-pound paper, a 0.05 millimeter HB mechanical pencil, a large brush to keep my surface clean, a sheet of copy paper to protect my drawing, a Boss Stitch electric sharpener, and a kneaded eraser. And as I do for any work, I've created a color palette to reference throughout the process. So let's get started. So let's talk a little bit about technique. And I want to mention one tool that I didn't mention in my intro, and that is a blending stump. So technique, you'll notice I'm starting top to bottom, left to right. The reason for this is partly because of the technique I'm using in the drawing process and why I didn't mention a blending stump. I'm not going to be blending with any tool other than the pencils themselves because I'm keeping my pencils super sharp and using almost no pressure at all. So what this does for me is it allows me to layer multiple layers one on top of another, like 20 layers. It's ridiculous how many layers you can put just by keeping your pressure very light and not damaging your paper. And when I say damaging, I mean flattening it out, losing the tooth. If you press too hard, your paper becomes too smooth and you just can't put layer upon layer. Also, keeping my pencils super sharp allows me to get into all the little divots in the paper and fill in all the little valleys without losing the tooth. And that's my goal all throughout this process. Now, guys, it takes a long time. Not everybody is going to want to be as patient and put in as much time as it takes to do this technique properly. Most of the time, it's the weight of the pencil. That's all the pressure that is being applied. So why do a technique like this? Results. I love the way it looks. The way the flesh blends and so forth is so great. One last thing I wanted to mention is video quality. Guys, I know this video is kind of garbage. It's because my camera stinks. This is the first time I've ever recorded myself doing any artwork, and I just don't have the proper equipment for it. I've got decent lighting, but the camera itself is pretty garbage. Sorry about that. So here's some music to distract you. Wow, did that arm take a long time to draw or what? I mean, we're 6 minutes in on a time-lapse video, and that translates into many hours of just working on that arm. Barely touching, I'm filling in all those little white dots, and you can see it's got a very lovely smooth transition. Now, of course, we're moving on to the background, and I'm following the same technique. I'm using no pressure really at all, and just one color. I'm using cloud blue right now. I'm going to go over and over and over, and anytime there's a little patch that looks a little bit lighter, I'll jump back and I'll do that. I'm always trying to compare an adjacent area that's a little bit darker with a lighter area and touch up until I get it just right. So now I'm moving on to the hair. Now there's a bunch of different ways that you can go about doing hair, and a lot of artists prefer to lay down their dark colors and then go over with a lighter color on top of the dark to put in their highlights. Well, in this case, the reference photo has a lot of contrast, and the highlighted areas are very light, and the dark areas are pretty dark. So what I'm doing is laying down all of my highlights with either cream or beige or yellowed orange to get those in place, and then I'm cutting in around them with the darker colors. And in this section, on this, especially this side of the head with the hair, I am pressing a little bit harder with my darker colors, but only after I've laid down my dark foundation first. So I'll use my dark umber to get my base layer, and then I'll come back over it with sepia or even some black. Now, guys, if anybody tells you don't use black in artwork because black doesn't exist in nature, just disregard that, okay? That's not true. Frankly, if you're laying down like a dark brown or a dark umber or whatever first, then you come over with a light touch and lay down your black, it's not going to be true black. It's going to be darker brown. So that's how I'm approaching this, and you'll see as it goes, it turns out very nicely. I mentioned early on in the video that my technique was going left to right, but I never expressed exactly why. And it's really very simple. I'm right-handed. Going left to right means never smudging the finished work. So now we're getting to the part of the portrait that many artists start with. Now, I'm not here to tell anybody how to do art because there's frankly no one way to do it. I'm just saying I'm going left to right for the reasons I've already expressed, but many artists like to start with the eye. And I understand why. And especially when it comes to making videos of this stuff, it gives you a focal point, something to look at. And, having a beautiful eye to stare at while you're watching somebody do a time lapse, it makes sense. I get it. That's not how I've proceeded, but if you stuck around this long, I'm going to give you something to look at. Okay, so she has most of a face now. And while I am not at this point satisfied with the skin tone, I've erased the graphite guidelines around her lips and started to lay down a little bit of color to define their shape. I'll get back to working on her mouth in a little bit, but for now, I just wanted to get that outline done, and then I'm going to go back to working on the flesh tones on her cheeks and her chin and all around the lips. I will be spending a lot of time as the video goes on here, going back over and over and over, adding a little bit more depth, layering color upon color, more of the yellowed orange, which is pretty much the base on this side of her face, in addition to beige and the blush pink and some orange and burnt ochre. As I'm finishing up her lips here, you may notice I've colored the lips all in various shades of red, and then I went back and I did hit certain highlighted areas with a white over the top of the dark color. The highlights on her lip were not real glossy, so it turned out just fine. So the last step I took on the mouth was to go ahead and darken down those teeth. The whites of the eye and the teeth are never actually white. If you're going to do anything resembling photorealism, you always have to darken those things down. I think I used a 20% cool gray and a little bit of blush pink and maybe half a dozen other different colors just to bring what you think of as white areas down to a realistic color. So now I'm going to be working on her neck a little bit more, and I noticed as I was going that despite the fact that she had some necklines and the way the shadows on the muscles were contoured and so forth, it started to give the impression that she had an Adam's apple. And guys, let me just say this straight out. Women do not have Adam's apples. Otherwise, they'd be called Eve's apples or something. I don't know. But bottom line is, men have Adam's apples and Amber Heard does not. So you'll notice as I go here, I bring that down. I've got to add a lot more shadowing and so forth, but I make sure to diminish those lines and shadows that were on my reference photo that as I translated them onto my drawing started to give too much of an impression of an anatomical feature that females just don't have.